Welcome, friend. As you settle into bed tonight, allow your imagination to wander back in time, far from the rush of modern life. As you lie back tonight, let your thoughts drift away from the bright hum of the modern world. Imagine instead the stillness of a medieval village, where the day ended with the toll of church bells and the quiet settling of shutters. There were no glowing screens, no ticking clocks, no buzzing streetlights, only darkness, firelight, and the soft creak of timber beams. In this world, people approach sleep in ways that might seem odd to us now, their nightly routines filled with habits both practical and peculiar. Before we begin, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's super amazing how there are so many viewers across the world who enjoys this type of content. Please be sure to drop a comment below to let me know what part of the world you're listening from. I would truly appreciate that. Now, lay back, relax, maybe have some wine, with a cozy blanket, and let's travel together, way, way back together. One of the quirkiest traditions was the idea of segmented sleep. Instead of drifting into one long slumber, medieval people often slept in two separate phases. They would rest for a few hours after sunset, wake in the middle of the night to pray, chat, or even visit neighbours, and then return to bed for their second sleep. This midnight interlude was not seen as unusual, but as a normal and even productive part of the evening. Some wrote letters, others stoked the fire, and many quietly pondered dreams or spiritual thoughts, believing that the midnight hour was especially powerful for reflection. Beds themselves were curious things. While wealthy nobles might enjoy carved wooden frames piled high with feather mattresses, the average villager often slept on a sack of straw called a palliasse. These mattresses were lumpy and had to be regularly beaten or shaken to drive out mice, fleas, and other unwelcome guests. To add a layer of warmth, some families even stuffed herbs like lavender, mugwort, or chamomile among the straw, not only for their fragrance but also because people believed they warded off evil spirits. In cottages with dirt floors, the bed was sometimes little more than a raised wooden board to keep sleepers from lying directly on the cold earth. Privacy was rare in the medieval world, and so sleeping arrangements were far more communal than we might expect. Families, sometimes entire households, often shared a single bed or slept side by side in the same room. Travellers who stopped at inns were accustomed to sleeping with strangers, with as many as 3 or 4 people sharing a bed. It wasn't considered scandalous at the time, but rather a simple necessity of a limited space and resources. For warmth in winter, this closeness was even welcomed, as the combined heat of bodies made the difference between a comfortable night and a shivering one. Oddly enough, sleeping with animals was also common. In a drafty farmhouse, it wasn't unusual for a piglet, a dog, or a few chickens to nestle close to the family bed. The animals provided warmth, and in some cases they were kept indoors overnight for safety. Imagine drifting to sleep to the sound of a rooster shuffling in the corner, or the occasional grunt of a pig curled against your legs. What today might seem unsanitary was then practical and even comforting, in a world where warmth and security mattered more than luxury. Another curious habit involved what medieval people wore, or didn't wear, to bed. While modern pyjamas designed for comfort, many medieval folk simply slept in the same linen shift or undergarments they wore all day. Wealthier people sometimes had specific nightshirts, long loose garments that looked much like a robe, while peasants often went to bed nearly unclothed. Heavy woolen blankets were prized in winter, but many households had only a single covering that everyone shared. On especially cold nights, some families even slept with heated stones wrapped in cloth tucked under the covers, a kind of medieval hot water bottle. Superstitions shaped the way people approached sleep as well. Some believed it was dangerous to sleep with your mouth open, since evil spirits or even small animals could enter. Others thought that sleeping on your back invited bad dreams, while lying on your left side was linked to ill health. To protect themselves, villagers might place a small iron object, like a knife, under the pillow, or sprinkle holy water around the bed. Mothers often told children that if they didn't say their prayers before bed, night demons or wandering witches might slip into their dreams. In towns and cities, noise and light shaped sleep in different ways. Street cries, bells ringing at odd hours, and the rattle of carts meant that city dwellers rarely enjoyed silent nights. Candlelight or the glow of a fireplace was often the only illumination, but because candles were expensive, most people preferred darkness. For this reason, people developed a habit of early rising, going to bed not long after dusk and waking before dawn to start their labour. The rhythm of sleep was closely tied to the natural light of the seasons, with long winter nights spent mostly in bed, and short summer nights leaving little time for rest. Dreams held a special place in the medieval imagination. People believed dreams were messages, sometimes from God, sometimes from mischievous spirits. A dream of flying might be seen as a blessing, while one of being chased could be taken as a warning of sin. Some households even kept small dream books, collections of symbols and their supposed meanings. If you dreamed of bread, it might mean good fortune was coming. If you dreamed of fire, it could be a sign of trouble ahead. Night after night, people went to sleep expecting not just rest, but visions that could shape their choices at dawn. Insomnia, too, was not unknown, though they did not call it by that name. Medieval people had their remedies. One common trick was to drink warm posset, a mixture of milk curdled with ale or wine before bed. Another was to place a sachet of dried herbs like hops or rosemary under the pillow. Physicians sometimes recommended rubbing the temples with warmed oils or laying a heated brick wrapped in cloth near the feet. For the pious, repeating a set number of prayers was thought to calm the mind, and if nothing worked, some simply accepted wakefulness as part of the segmented night, rising to pray, write, or tend the fire until drowsiness returned. Prayers themselves were stitched into the very fabric of sleep. Children were often taught rhyming prayers to recite before bed, much like lullabies, asking for protection through the vulnerable hours of night. Adults might whisper the Lord's Prayer or invoke a patron saint. Some believed angels hovered at the bedside to ward off demons that prowled in darkness. It was common to make the sign of the cross over one's body or bed before lying down. In this way, sleep was not just a physical act, but a spiritual one, a small rehearsal for the long rest of death, as some clergy reminded their flock. Snoring, that most ordinary of disturbances, had its own reputation. To some, loud snoring was merely a nuisance. To others, it carried more ominous meaning. Medical writers thought it was caused by imbalances in the body's humours, especially excess phlegm. Remedies ranged from tilting the head upright with extra pillows to chewing on fennel or anise seeds before sleep. But in popular lore, a person who snored heavily was sometimes thought to be under the influence of spirits, or worse, a witch taking nightly journeys. Still, most families, sharing their beds and chambers, simply grew accustomed to the chorus of snores and murmurs, as much a part of the night as the hoot of an owl outside. There were even odd beliefs about posture in bed. Physicians advised that one should first lie on the right side to aid digestion, then roll to the left after a while. Sleeping face down was discouraged, thought to invite suffocation or sinful dreams. Some medical texts warned against lying with arms crossed over the chest, as it resembled the position of the dead and might invite death itself. These instructions may seem rigid to us now, yet they reveal how deeply people connected body, soul, and sleep, treating even posture as a matter of health and morality. Night terrors were not merely dismissed as restless sleep, but were often interpreted as spiritual assaults. Many believed that demons called incubi or succubi would press upon the chest of the sleeper, causing a heavy, suffocating sensation. Today we might call it sleep paralysis, but in the medieval imagination it was far more sinister. People spoke of waking to see shadowy figures sitting upon them, stealing their breath. To protect themselves, they placed charms of iron under the pillow, hung sprigs of St. John's wort over the bed, or slept with a small crucifix tied around the neck. The terror was real, and yet the remedies, gentle herbs, sacred symbols, whispered prayers, were as much comfort as cure. Charms against bad dreams were often woven into the fabric of everyday life. A small pouch of herbs sewn shut and pinned to a child's nightshirt might keep nightmares away. Some parents whispered a rhyme 3 times before blowing over their children's faces as if brushing away the shadows. Others sprinkled holy water on pillows before bed. In certain regions, placing shoes at the bedside with the toes pointing away from the sleeper was thought to keep evil spirits from returning during the night. These practices, half practical, half magical, remind us that medieval people lived in a world where medicine and superstition mingled freely. Both meant to ease the quiet hours of darkness. For travellers, the question of where to sleep brought its own quirks. At busy inns along trade routes, beds were few and expensive. To manage space, innkeepers often allowed strangers to share beds. A merchant might find himself lying beside a farmer, or even a pair of monks. In some places, these arrangements were so common that people joked about them in song and verse. There were even unwritten bed-sharing agreements, rules of etiquette that meant one should keep still, avoid hogging the blanket, and certainly not talk too much once the candle was snuffed out. To modern ears, this might sound uncomfortable, yet for the weary medieval traveller, it was simply part of the road. In fact, disputes about beds could grow lively. Chronicles tell of arguments in taverns where one guest accused another of kicking like a mule in his sleep, or of monopolising the shared blanket. There were even court records, rare but real, where travellers sued innkeepers for failing to provide fair sleeping space. Such quarrels might sound humorous to us, but they show how central the bed was in a world where it was not a private refuge but often a public stage shared with family, friends or strangers. The sounds of the night were another curiosity. Besides snoring, people often talked in their sleep or muttered prayers unconsciously. This could be unsettling, especially in shared quarters, where whispered phrases might be mistaken for secrets or confessions. Some believed that words spoken in dreams revealed hidden truths or foretold future events. Others dismissed them as nonsense. Still, in a candlelit chamber filled with sleepers, a sudden cry or murmur could ripple unease through the room, leaving listeners wondering what shadows had passed through their companions' dreams. Lullabies in the medieval world were far simpler than the polished rhymes we know today, yet they carried the same tender purpose. Mothers and nurses crooned soft, repetitive phrases, often little more than hushed prayers sung to a rhythm that matched the rocking of a cradle. Some of these lullabies asked for angels to guard the child, while others warned against goblins or fairies who might steal restless infants in the night. The melodies were plain, but the effect was soothing, carrying the child, and often the mother herself, into sleep. In smoky cottages, where shadows stretched across beams and the wind pressed against shutters, these gentle songs brought warmth and reassurance. Astrology, too, shaped beliefs about sleep. Learned physicians often consulted the stars when giving advice on health, and this extended into the night's rest. Certain signs of the zodiac were thought to favour sound sleep, while others were said to stir restless dreams. Some manuals even instructed people to arrange their beds so that the sleeper's head pointed toward auspicious directions, aligning body and cosmos. A restless night might be explained by the movement of Mars or the influence of Saturn. For the medieval mind, the heavens and the bedroom were not separate worlds, but threads woven into the same cosmic tapestry. The moment of waking at dawn carried its own meaning. Villagers rose early not only from necessity but from habit shaped by centuries of rhythm. When the first cock crowed, households stirred, for it was considered unlucky to remain long in bed once the light had returned. The day was thought to belong to God, and to waste the first hours was seen as both slothful and spiritually careless. In towns, the ringing of the church bells at matins called people to prayer even before sunrise, ensuring that the day began with devotion rather than idleness. For farmers, waking with dawn was simply practical. Animals needed tending, and fields awaited the plough. Yet waking at dawn was not always brisk. Many lingered between first and second sleep, half dreaming, half aware, using the early hours for quiet reflection. Writers of the time even noted that some of their best thoughts came in that interval before daybreak, when the mind was soft and unguarded. For others, this twilight between sleeping and waking was when visions came most vividly. Whether they were divine messages or unsettling apparitions, to wake at dawn then was not merely to begin work, it was to step from one mysterious world into another, carrying whispers of dreams into the brightness of day. Midnight noise was a fact of life in many towns and villages, and people learned to live with it. Dogs barked at passing shadows, roosters crowed at odd hours, and travellers on horseback clattered down cobblestones long before dawn. In busy market towns, bakers were often the first to rise, banging dough on wooden tables while most of the town still slept. The sound carried through thin walls, but few complained. Fresh bread was worth the disruption. In homes near monasteries, the ringing of bells in the middle of the night was a constant summoning monks to their prayers at matins. Rather than being seen as an annoyance, these nocturnal sounds often blended into the rhythm of rest, part of the night's familiar landscape. Church curfews added another layer of peculiarity. The word curfew itself comes from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire. Bells were rung at evening to remind villagers to bank their hearths and prepare for bed. In some towns, it was even illegal to keep fires burning past a certain hour, both for safety and for discipline. These curfew bells shaped the pattern of sleep, signalling the boundary between day and night. Once the bells tolled, streets grew quiet, shutters closed, and families gathered around the fading glow of the hearth. For children, the curfew bell was as sure a sign of bedtime as the setting sun. Food and drink also had their place in bedtime rituals. While most suppers were eaten early, some people indulged in what we might call bedtime snacks. Warm milk was common, sometimes sweetened with honey or spiced with cinnamon if such luxuries were available. Wealthier households sipped hippocras, a wine mixed with sugar and spices, believed to settle the stomach. In rural cottages, it might be a simple piece of bread dipped in broth, or a small portion of cheese. Physicians often advised against heavy meals too close to bedtime, warning that they caused troubled dreams. Still, many ignored the advice, and records show that hearty snacks were a comfort against the long, cold nights. For the restless or the worried, sharing food late at night could also be social. During the break between first and second sleep, families sometimes gathered to eat a little more, talk softly, or even share news and gossip. This midnight snack was less about indulgence and more about passing the quiet hours together. Imagine the glow of embers in the hearth, the soft tearing of bread, and the low murmur of voices as the medieval household drifted back towards slumber. Dream interpretation was so popular that entire manuals were written to guide the curious. These books listed common symbols and their supposed meanings, and though they varied by region, certain themes repeated. To dream of water was thought to signal change, of birds, a message from heaven, of broken shoes, some misfortune ahead. Even humble villagers knew bits of this dream lore, passing it along as evening stories by the hearth. Some physicians insisted that dreams reflected the balance, or imbalance, of the body's humours, yet others believed they were windows to the divine, whispered messages to help one prepare for the day. For many, the world of dreams was as real and meaningful as waking life. The night watchmen, too, were part of sleep's landscape. In towns and cities, watchmen patrolled the streets after dark, calling out the hours to reassure residents that all was well. Their cries often rhymed, blending duty with a kind of chant. Past 10 o'clock and all is well, they might sing, their voices echoing down narrow lanes. Sometimes they warned of fire, thieves, or poor weather to come. For families drifting in and out of slumber, these calls were both comfort and interruption, the reminder that someone kept watch, but also that the world beyond the shuttered windows was never fully still. Seasons shaped sleep in ways modern people rarely experience. In winter, with nights stretching long and deep, medieval families spent far more hours in bed. Candles and firewood were precious, so darkness was simply accepted. People rose late and slept early, often layering themselves with blankets of wool and fur. In summer, by contrast, nights were short and restless, with dawn arriving quickly. Farmers rose before the sun to take advantage of the cool morning, and many households stayed active well into the warm evenings, leaving less time for rest. Sleep was not a fixed ritual, but something that bent and shifted with the turning of the year. Even the weather within a single season mattered. A night of heavy rain might lull villagers to sleep with its steady rhythm on thatched roofs, while high winds could rattle shutters and whistle through gaps in the timber. Superstitions grew around such sounds. Rain was seen as cleansing, a promise of fertility for fields, while storm winds were thought to carry restless spirits. Families sometimes told children that thunder at night meant angels were bowling in heaven, a tale meant to soothe trembling little ones in the dark. In monasteries, sleep followed a rhythm unlike that of ordinary villagers. Monks were expected to rise at fixed hours through the night to chant their prayers. This meant they rarely enjoyed long unbroken rest. Instead, their nights were punctuated by the tolling of bells, calling them to the chapel for psalms and chants before returning briefly to bed. Dormitories were shared, rows of narrow pallets lined up side by side, with little more than straw mattresses and thin blankets. Silence was enforced, so the only sounds were the rustle of habits and the shuffle of sandaled feet on stone floors. For monks, sleep was less a private comfort, and more a discipline, part of a life devoted to constant devotion. Noble bedrooms, in contrast, could be elaborate, though not necessarily more restful. A great lord or lady might sleep in a large canopy bed draped with heavy curtains. These curtains were practical as well as decorative, keeping out draughts and giving a measure of privacy in chambers that were often shared with servants, guards, or even visiting petitioners. Nobles sometimes dined in bed, entertained guests there, and conducted business from beneath their blankets. The bedroom was as much a public space as a private retreat. Yet despite the grandeur, sleep itself was not always easy. Thick feather beds could be stifling, and tapestries, while beautiful, did little to stop winter's chill from seeping through stone walls. Sickness added its own strange patterns to the night. With limited medicine, people often turned to home remedies to ease discomfort before sleep. A person with a fever might be wrapped in cloth soaked in vinegar. Those with aching joints might sleep with poultices of herbs strapped to their limbs. Some believed drinking warmed ale mixed with egg yolks helped quiet a cough before bed. Others relied on charms, laying relics or saints' tokens under their pillows to guard against illness. The sick often disrupted the sleep of entire households, for in shared chambers, every cough and groan carried through the night. Yet families accepted this as part of life, watching over each other in darkness with patience and care. Illness also deepened the fear of night terrors. Many believed that spirits preyed upon the weak and feverish, slipping into their dreams to torment them. Priests were sometimes called to bless the bed of the ailing, sprinkling holy water on the mattress and making the sign of the cross over the sleeper. In some households, candles were kept burning through the night beside the sickbed, both for light and as a symbol of divine protection. These flickering flames, though costly, were thought to hold back the shadows until morning returned. On warm summer nights, when cottages grew stifling and the air inside was heavy with smoke, many families chose to sleep outdoors. They dragged straw mattresses or simple blankets into courtyards, gardens, or even fields. Under the open sky, sleep was broken by the hum of crickets, the lowing of cattle, and the occasional bark of a distant dog. Children marvelled at the sweep of stars overhead. Though parents sometimes warned them not to point at the night sky, some believed it tempted fate. Sleeping outdoors was refreshing, but it was not without risk. Stray animals, sudden rains, and swarms of insects often sent families hurrying back indoors before dawn. Still, for many, a night beneath the stars was a welcome escape from the confines of a smoky room. Travellers on the road faced entirely different sleep routines. In the absence of a proper inn, wayfarers often camped by the roadside or in the shelter of barns, curling up with their cloaks as blankets. Groups of merchants or pilgrims would cluster together for safety, forming circles where fires could be kept burning through the night. One person might take a turn staying awake, keeping watch against thieves or wild animals. The sleep was light and uneasy, interrupted by every creak of wagon wheels or rustle in the grass. Yet for those bound on long journeys, this was simply the rhythm of the road, drifting into shallow rest beneath the stars, then rising at first light to continue the path. The moon itself was thought to influence sleep. A bright full moon could disturb rest, making people restless and uneasy. Some believed moonlight carried strange powers, seeping into the body if it touched a sleeper's face. Others warned that sleeping directly under moonlight might cause madness or fever. To prevent this, shutters were closed tightly on nights of the full moon, and children were sometimes covered with extra cloths to shield their faces from its glow. Yet the moon also inspired wonder. Farmers trusted it to guide planting and harvest, and poets praised its silver beauty. In sleep, however, the moon was regarded with caution, a heavenly light that might unsettle dreams if left unchecked. Superstitions about the moon tied into nightly rituals. Some households recited short prayers when the moon was full, asking for protection against nightmares. Others believed that turning the pillow over beneath moonlight could reset troubled dreams, allowing a person to fall back into peaceful rest. These little customs, half belief and half comfort, gave shape to the way families moved between wakefulness and slumber, keeping the unknown mysteries of the night at bay. Servants in grand households often slept wherever space allowed. While the lord and lady enjoyed canopied beds piled with linens, their attendants rested on pallets in hallways, kitchens, or even at the foot of their master's bed. In castles, entire groups of servants might sleep in one chamber, with straw mattresses laid shoulder to shoulder. Privacy was rare, but loyalty was expected. Should their master call in the night, a servant had to be ready at once. For many, sleep was a duty as much as a necessity, taken in odd places and odd hours depending on the rhythm of the household. the soft crackle of a dying hearth, or the muffled echo of footsteps in stone corridors were the lullabies of their weary nights. Inns, especially in bustling towns, were notorious for their cramped sleeping quarters. A traveller who paid for a bed might find himself sharing it with not just one stranger but several. Where beds ran short, common rooms were spread with straw for guests to sleep in rows, wrapped in cloaks for warmth. The smell of ale, the snoring of strangers, and the constant shuffle of people coming and going made for restless rest. Yet these inns were hubs of news and gossip, where merchants, pilgrims, and soldiers crossed paths. Even half-slept nights in noisy quarters were accepted as part of the experience of life on the road. Children's nightmares were a particular concern, as many parents believed dark spirits preyed on the young. To keep bad dreams away, mothers sometimes placed knives or scissors under a child's pillow, the sharp iron thought to repel evil. Others tied little charms, carved wooden crosses, sprigs of rue, or knotted strings around the bed. In some villages, parents told children that if they drank a sip of holy water before sleep, the angels would watch over their dreams. These practices were less about fear than comfort, offering a sense of protection in a world where shadows seemed alive, and every creak in the night could spark unease. Some families turned nightmares into storytelling. If a child woke crying, parents might ask them to describe the dream, and then weave it into a gentle tale with a safe, happy ending. A dream of being chased by wolves, for example, could be reshaped into a story where the wolves became friendly companions, guiding the child to a warm cottage filled with bread and milk. In this way, nightmares were softened into fables, easing the child back into rest. The method was simple but clever, teaching children that even the darkest dreams could be bent toward comfort. Seasonal festivals often reshaped the rhythm of sleep. During midsummer celebrations, villagers might stay awake long into the night, feasting and dancing around bonfires that burned until dawn. Sleep was brief, snatched only after the embers cooled, leaving many drowsy through the next day's work. In winter, by contrast, long nights were filled with storytelling and song before bed. Families huddled together under blankets while wind howled outside. Special nights, like Christmas Eve or the eve of a saint's feast, were sometimes passed in watchful vigils, with entire communities staying up late in candlelight, blending devotion with merriment. Sleep was never entirely separate from the calendar. It bent and shifted with the turning of the holy days and seasonal rituals. Oversleeping carried its own judgments. To sleep late was often seen as a sign of laziness, a moral failing rather than simple indulgence. Preachers railed against the sin of sloth, warning that the devil crept into idle beds. Proverbs circulated in villages, "He who lies long in bed finds trouble waiting." Even so, on rare feast days, some households allowed themselves longer mornings, with parents whispering that even the angels rested a little after a holy night. Still, for most, the habit of early rising was ingrained, and anyone who lingered too long beneath their blankets risked being scolded, or even mocked, by neighbours. The fear of plague added a heavy shadow to medieval sleep. In times of pestilence, people turned to whispered prayers as they lay down at night. Some begged saints like Sebastian or Roch to shield them from disease. Others traced the sign of the cross on their pillows before closing their eyes. In certain towns, children were taught short rhymes meant to keep sickness away through the night, small charms of words repeated in the hush before slumber. Families sometimes burned herbs, filling rooms with pungent smoke they believed could drive away foul airs. Sleep, in those days of fear, was an act of faith as much as rest. A surrender to the night with hope of waking to another dawn. Yet even in such times there was a strange resilience. Villagers still told jokes at bedtime, still sang soft songs to lull children, still lay side by side beneath the rough blankets and trusted that morning would come. In this way, sleep was not only a necessity but a quiet act of defiance against worry and illness. The night might bring shadows, but with prayer, with family, with ritual, medieval people faced it bravely, one dream at a time. Pilgrims, who set out on long journeys to shrines and holy places, often had to make do with whatever shelter they could find. Some slept in barns or stables offered by kind villagers, others in the open fields along the road. Pilgrims travelling together would gather in groups, laying down side by side, cloaks pulled tight around their shoulders. They carried small tokens, a scallop shell, a badge, or a wooden cross, that they often tucked beneath their heads at night for protection. At roadside chapels, some were allowed to sleep on straw within the church porch itself, resting in the shadow of saints. These humble sleeping arrangements were part of the pilgrimage, a reminder of humility and sacrifice, endured with hope of blessings at journey's end. Sleepwalking, though poorly understood, was both feared and pitied. A child who rose from bed and wandered in the night was thought to be under the influence of restless spirits. Some families tied ribbons or cords to the wrists of known sleepwalkers, securing them to the bedpost to prevent wandering. Others sprinkled ash on the floor before sleep, believing the trail of footprints in the morning revealed whether the spirit had walked. Physicians suggested milder remedies, like bathing the feet in warm water before bed, or rubbing the temples with oil of roses. Yet in villages, most relied on charms, such as placing iron scissors on the threshold to prevent the sleeper from leaving the house. Taverns provided another kind of nighttime shelter, though they were rarely restful. Travellers who could not afford proper inns often paid a small fee to sleep in the common room of a tavern, where the floor was strewn with rushes or straw. Sleep came lightly amid the clatter of mugs, the laughter of drinkers, and the shuffle of musicians' feet. Some dozed sitting upright at tables, heads resting on folded arms, while others curled up in corners near the fire. It was not uncommon for quarrels to break out, or for thieves to slip through the crowd, yet taverns offered warmth and company that an empty road could not. For many, it was a trade-off they gladly accepted. There were even stories of taverns with song beds, where groups of drunken patrons, too loud to rest, would sing themselves to sleep in ragged chorus. To a traveller lying nearby, the rough music might be more disturbing than soothing, yet it was part of the strange patchwork of medieval rest. Nights were rarely silent. Sleep was something people snatched where they could, amid laughter, prayer, or noise. In many villages, healers and wise women were sought out when sleep itself became troubled. If a person could not rest, or if nightmares plagued them, the healer might prepare a small potion, often warmed milk infused with herbs like poppy, valerian, or chamomile. Sometimes prayers were murmured over the cup before it was drunk, mingling medicine with blessing. In certain cases, healers prescribed charms instead of draughts. A slip of parchment with a sacred verse, folded and tucked beneath the pillow, or a wax seal stamped with a cross to be carried in the nightshirt. These remedies were less about science than comfort, yet they gave the sufferer hope, and often, hope alone was enough to soften the restless hours. Prophetic dreams fascinated medieval people, and even the simplest villager might believe that their sleep held glimpses of the future. If someone dreamed of a wedding, it might foretell prosperity. If they dreamed of teeth falling out, it could be seen as a warning of death in the household. Clergy sometimes cautioned against taking dreams too seriously, yet others embraced them, seeing visions as gifts from God. There are records of monarchs who consulted their confessors after troubling dreams, as if royal destiny itself might be revealed through the images of sleep. For ordinary folk, dreams were woven into daily talk, shared in hushed voices over morning bread, part of the fabric of community life. The furnishings of peasant homes reveal yet another oddity, the bed bench. In small cottages, space was scarce, so a bench by the hearth often doubled as a sleeping place. During the day, it was used for sitting, eating, or working, but at night a child or servant might stretch out on it, wrapped in a rough blanket. Some benches had lids that opened, storing household tools inside, so the sleeper quite literally lay atop the family's possessions. These sleeping spots were less comfortable than the straw pallets used by parents, yet they were practical, and for many they became a permanent place of rest. Even within the same household, sleeping arrangements revealed hierarchy. The master and mistress took the larger bed, often curtained for warmth and privacy, while children crowded together on a shared mattress. Servants and apprentices were left to benches, lofts, or even the hard-packed floor. This layering of beds reflected the structure of society itself, rank visible even in slumber. Yet despite the discomfort, laughter and chatter often filled these crowded rooms before sleep. Stories traded in whispers as families and households wound down together. Seasonal work often pushed people into unusual patterns of sleep. At harvest time, when every hour mattered, farmers sometimes worked by moonlight, scythes swinging through fields long after sunset. Families gathered to tie sheaves and stack them even under the pale glow, their laughter and songs carrying into the night air. Sleep was taken in snatches, with workers curling up in barns or even in the fields themselves. The cool air, the scent of cut grain, and the distant call of owls surrounded them as they drifted off. It was not luxurious rest, but it was enough, and the knowledge of a full granary made the weariness almost welcome. Celestial events carried their own weight in the world of sleep. Comets, in particular, were feared as harbingers of unrest. When one streaked across the sky, people whispered that dreams would be troubled, that the balance of heaven had shifted. Some claimed that they woke from sleep during such nights with a feeling of dread pressing upon them. To ward off the comet's supposed influence, households might place bowls of water by the bed to reflect its light away, or pray that angels would guard their dreams until dawn. Even stars were not always trusted. While they guided sailors and travellers, their sudden brilliance could unsettle the mind of a sleeper lying under an open roof. Marriage beds were treated with special reverence. When a couple was newly wed, their bed was sometimes blessed by a priest, prayers spoken over it to ensure fertility, harmony, and protection from misfortune. Friends and family often witnessed the couple being led to their chamber, a mixture of joy and ceremony, surrounding what to modern ears might feel far too public. Curtains were drawn tightly afterward, both for privacy and for symbolism. The closed bed was a little world of its own. The belief was that if the first nights of marriage were safe and peaceful, the union itself would prosper. Even in slumber, love and fate were thought to be intertwined. Beds could also become symbolic in death. The passing of an elder was sometimes described as their last sleep, and people took care to keep the bed orderly, blessed, and surrounded by candles in the hours after. To the medieval mind, the boundaries between sleeping, dreaming, and dying were thin. Each night was a rehearsal for eternity, and each waking a small victory against the dark. Candles and night lamps played a quiet but important role in medieval bedrooms. For most, light was precious and not to be wasted. Candles were made from tallow, which smoked and smelled, or from beeswax, which was far more costly. Many families extinguished every flame before bed, relying only on the glow of embers from the hearth to light the room. Yet in wealthier households, a candle might be left burning through the night, believed to guard against spirits and thieves. Some carved lamps with small openings were designed to burn slowly, casting dim, flickering patterns on the walls until dawn. To a child watching from bed, those shifting shadows might become giants, saints, or demons in the night, blending imagination with faith and fear. In towns, guild apprentices often lived together in cramped lodgings, where bedtime was less about comfort and more about camaraderie. After long days of labour, hammering metal, weaving cloth, or hauling goods, they sometimes sang as they prepared to sleep. These weren't lullabies, but work songs softened and slowed, echoing in dark lofts above shops. The voices of half a dozen weary young men murmuring tunes together could be strangely calming, like a shared release of the day's burdens. When silence finally fell, snores rose quickly, and the wooden beams above their heads seemed to hum with the rhythm of communal rest. But sleep was never free of suspicion, and witches were often blamed when it faltered. If a person felt drained upon waking, it might be said that a witch had ridden them in the night, stealing their vitality. Cattle found sluggish in the morning were thought to have been hag-ridden as well, their dreams stolen by dark magic. To ward off such dangers, people sometimes hung iron horseshoes over doorways or placed protective charms near their beds. A broom left lying across the threshold was also believed to trip up unwanted spirits before they could enter the chamber. Sleep was sacred, and so anything that disturbed it, even ordinary exhaustion, was explained through the lens of magic and mystery. These beliefs gave weight to the ordinary act of drifting into slumber. Every flicker of candlelight, every creak of a floorboard, every troubled dream could carry meaning. Yet the very act of preparing for bed, saying prayers, arranging charms, sharing songs or whispers, was its own comfort, helping families settle into the long night with trust that dawn would arrive as it always had. Seasonal night fairs often turned villages into sleepless places. On feast days or during market festivals, stalls stayed open long after sunset, lit by flickering torches and candle lanterns. Music drifted through the streets, with fiddles, drums, and voices weaving together into lively tunes. Jugglers, storytellers, and dancers entertained crowds who pushed sleep aside for merriment. Children were often kept awake far past their usual bedtime, dazzled by the spectacle. For households nearby, the noise of revellers could stretch into the small hours, making rest nearly impossible. Yet such disruption was accepted, even welcomed, as part of the rare joy of communal celebration, a bright inversion of the usual quiet rhythms of night. Bedtime drinks varied across regions, but many were unusual by today's standards. Spiced ale was a common favourite, beer warmed and mixed with nutmeg, cloves, or ginger. Some believed it aided digestion and settled the body for sleep. Wealthier households might sip mulled wine, while poorer villagers turned to simple warm milk or even weak beer, which was safer than water in many places. In monasteries, monks sometimes drank small measures of herbal infusions before retiring, prepared from their own gardens. These brews blurred the line between medicine and comfort, with every sip meant to ease the transition into rest. Weapons in the bedchamber were another quirk of medieval life. In towns prone to unrest, or villages vulnerable to raiders, many families slept with knives, axes, or staffs close at hand. A sword might hang from a bedpost, or a dagger be tucked beneath a pillow. Even in more peaceful places the habit lingered, born of a world where danger was never far away. To sleep armed was a form of reassurance, a way of knowing that if shadows stirred too loudly one could rise and defend the household. This readiness was woven into the culture of night, where sleep was not only rest but also a vulnerable crossing between one day and the next. Sometimes these weapons were never used at all, simply becoming part of the household's nightly ritual. Children grew accustomed to the sight of their father setting a blade within reach before lying down, as ordinary as a prayer or a blanket. In this way, fear was softened by familiarity, an odd comfort found in the weight of steel resting quietly in the shadows. Church porches were a common refuge for the weary. Pilgrims, beggars, or travellers arriving after the town gates were shut often curled up beneath the stone arches of a parish church. The porch, roofed but open, gave a measure of shelter from rain and wind. Some churches even allowed straw to be laid down for such sleepers, though others frowned on it, fearing disorder. To lie in a holy place was both comforting and unsettling. Comfort in the sense of divine protection, unsettling because the boundary between sacred ground and nightly rest was so thin. Still, many a wayfarer found their first sleep of the night upon cold stone, beneath carvings of saints who watched silently above. Animals, too, were thought to play a role in guiding sleep. Cats curling near the hearth were believed to absorb ill luck, keeping their masters safe through the night. Dogs, always close companions, were thought to sense approaching danger. A dog sleeping soundly was seen as a sure sign the household could rest easy. Roosters were even tied to beliefs about timing. A crow before midnight was considered a bad omen, while one at dawn was nature's proper signal to rise. In this way, the behaviour of animals was not just background noise, but part of the language of sleep itself, read carefully by those who relied upon every hint the natural world provided. Midnight storytelling circles were another cherished custom. In cottages during long winter nights, families often gathered around the hearth even after first sleep, sharing tales to fill the hours of darkness. These were not always grand legends, but small stories. Folk tales, family memories, even local gossip retold with flair. Children nestled against their parents, eyes half closed, listening as familiar voices spun threads of comfort. The rhythm of a tale, slow and unhurried, often blurred into dreams, so that listeners woke unsure whether the story had ended or continued inside their sleep. Such circles wove community as much as they filled time, reminding each listener that they were not alone in the vast silence of the night. These little rituals, sleeping in holy porches, watching animals for signs, gathering for stories, show how medieval people stitched safety and meaning into their nights. In a world of shadows and uncertainty, sleep was never just sleep. It was an act surrounded by habits, beliefs, and shared traditions, each one helping to soften the edges of darkness until dawn returned. Weather shaped the way people approached sleep as much as light or season. A still, foggy night was thought to weigh heavily on the chest, encouraging uneasy dreams. Rain, by contrast, was believed to cleanse the air, making slumber deeper and safer. Thunderstorms were explained with tales of angels battling demons in the heavens, a story meant to comfort children trembling at the cracks of sound. Wind was perhaps the most unsettling. Villagers believed that strong gusts carried wandering spirits, slipping under doors to disturb sleepers. To guard against this, some placed small piles of salt on the windowsill, hoping to keep the restless forces of weather at bay. Charms made from bones or shells sometimes found their way into sleeping spaces. A small bird bone, polished smooth, might be worn in a pouch around the neck to protect against nightmares. Seashells, especially when carried inland, were seen as tokens of safety, thought to hold the calming power of the ocean's rhythm. Mothers sometimes hung these objects above a cradle, believing they would lull the child to gentler dreams. While to us they might seem like trinkets, to the medieval mind they were protective shields, woven from nature and belief, resting silently in the shadows above the bed. Travelling musicians often had the hardest rest of all. Minstrels, pipers and fiddlers were welcomed into taverns for their songs, but when the last cup was drained and the crowd dispersed, they were left to sleep wherever space allowed. Some were given a bench near the fire, others a patch of straw in a stable alongside animals. It was not unusual for musicians to fall asleep still holding their instruments, cradling a lute or bagpipes as both pillow and protection. The life of a wanderer was uncertain, but music opened doors, and even the poorest bed was softened by the day's laughter and coin. Their snores and sighs became part of the nightly chorus of the medieval town. These fragments of custom, watching the weather, placing charms, listening to musicians settle into corners, remind us that the medieval night was alive with meaning. Sleep was never simply closing one's eyes. It was wrapped in signs, stories and songs, each one shaping the way people gave themselves over to rest. Dreams were often carried from the bed straight to the breakfast table. In the morning, families would share what they had seen in the night, treating dreams almost like messages delivered during sleep. A child might speak of flying, and parents would smile, saying it was a good omen. A farmer dreaming of withered crops might seek advice from neighbours or a priest. Even travellers in inns were known to exchange their night visions with strangers, weaving bonds over bread and ale before parting ways. These conversations gave dreams a place in daily life, blurring the line between night's mystery and day's work. For many, recounting a dream aloud was believed to lessen its power, turning fear into mere story. During times of siege, sleep took on strange shapes. In castles under attack, defenders often slept in their armour, or at least with helmets and weapons close to hand. Space was so scarce that men dozed sitting upright against walls, or curled in narrow stairwells that doubled as sleeping quarters. Fires were kept burning low to conserve fuel, so the chambers were cold and dim. Sleep came in brief, shallow bursts, ears always listening for horns or shouts from the watch. For civilians trapped inside city walls, families crowded together in cellars or storerooms, bedding down on sacks of grain. Dreams in such nights were uneasy, laced with hunger, fear, and the muffled thunder of war drums outside the gates. The idea of forbidden hours haunted the medieval imagination. It was said that around midnight, or especially in the hour just before dawn, spirits were most active. Some claimed to hear ghostly footsteps, others believed witches travelled in those hours, slipping through keyholes to steal breath from sleepers. Roosters were thought to play a protective role here. When they crowed, even in the dark before sunrise, it was believed they drove spirits back into hiding. To guard themselves, villagers often repeated short prayers when they woke in the middle of the night, or crossed themselves before turning on their side. In this way, even the silence of forbidden hours was filled with whispered words meant to keep the unseen at bay. The medieval night was full of such thresholds, between safety and fear, between the living and the spirit world, between waking and dreams. To close one's eyes was never simple, but always layered with meaning, rituals, and quiet hope for the return of morning light. Pillows and bedding carried their own meanings in medieval homes. For the wealthy, pillows were stuffed with feathers, sometimes even perfumed with dried herbs to sweeten the air. For the poor, a pillow might be nothing more than a folded cloak or a sack filled with straw. Some families believed that what you placed beneath your head could shape your dreams: lavender for peace, rosemary for protection, mugwort for visions. Blankets, too, were more than warmth. In some regions, a newly woven blanket was given as a marriage gift, meant to wrap a couple not only in comfort but in prosperity. To sleep under such coverings was both a physical and symbolic embrace. Restless children were soothed with an array of odd remedies. A few drops of warmed ale were sometimes given to make them drowsy, or milk infused with poppy seeds, though too much was considered dangerous. Mothers might sing charms alongside lullabies, short rhymes promising the child safe passage through dreams. Others whispered gentle warnings that if the child would not settle, fairies might come tapping at the window. To modern ears, these tales sound frightening, yet they often worked. Children, clutching their blankets, would close their eyes tightly rather than risk inviting the fair folk inside. Between prayer, song, and story, medieval parents wove a net of comfort around the smallest sleepers. Even night watchmen, whose duty was to guard while others rested, sometimes yielded to fatigue. In quiet towns with little trouble, it was not unusual for a watchman to doze against a wall or nap in a sheltered corner. Their long staves rested at their sides, their lanterns dimmed as their eyelids grew heavy. Fellow watchmen might wake them with a nudge, or passers-by might quietly step around them, knowing that the weight of sleepless hours often won. Though officially frowned upon, these brief naps were a secret rhythm of the night, tiny rebellions against the endless stretch of darkness. To the townsfolk tucked in their beds, the presence of a watchman, even half asleep, still carried comfort, a reminder that someone else shared the burden of the night. The medieval world, with all its habits and oddities, turned sleep into something communal, layered, and alive with meaning. From pillows laced with herbs to children lulled with charms, from watchmen's lanterns to whispered prayers, the night was never empty. It was full of ritual, imagination, and quiet resilience. At inns and in wealthy homes, bed warmers were often used to soften the shock of climbing under cold linens. These were metal pans filled with hot coals, slid carefully between the sheets to spread heat. The pan was whisked back out before anyone climbed in, though even then scorch marks on bedding were common. In humbler households, heated stones or bricks wrapped in cloth served the same purpose. Children sometimes clutched them like toys as they fell asleep, their warmth fading slowly through the night. Such simple comforts turned a draughty bed into a more welcoming refuge, a small luxury in a world where winter cold pressed hard against wooden shutters. Dreams were not just omens, but sometimes considered remedies in themselves. Physicians of the time believed that the body purged excess humours through dreaming, and that peaceful dreams indicated balance and health. A troubled dream, meanwhile, might suggest that the body needed cleansing, perhaps with herbs or fasting. Some healers even encouraged their patients to describe dreams in detail, treating them as clues to hidden ailments. The line between mind, spirit, and body blurred in sleep, so much so that a good dream was thought to have real power to heal the waking self. Saintly visions brought a deeper layer of wonder. Many stories circulated of people who dreamed of saints appearing at their bedside, offering comfort, advice, or healing. A sick villager might claim that Saint Apollonia touched their aching jaw in a dream, easing their pain. Others spoke of being guided by saints through landscapes of light, shown symbols that promised blessings to come. Whether taken literally or as metaphors, these visions gave hope to those who awoke with renewed faith. Sleep, in this sense, was not only rest, but a doorway, one that might open to divine encounters in the quiet hours of night. To the medieval mind, then, every part of slumber was alive with possibility. Beds could be warmed by fire, bodies restored by dreams, and souls touched by holy figures. The night was not empty or silent, but filled with unseen presences, both earthly and heavenly, woven into the fabric of ordinary rest. Vermin were an unavoidable part of medieval sleep. Straw mattresses, though practical, quickly became homes for fleas, lice, and even mice. Families often shook out their bedding at dusk, beating the straw with sticks to scatter pests before lying down. Herbs like pennyroyal and tansy were sometimes tucked into the mattress to repel insects, their sharp scents filling the room. Still, most people learned to live with the nightly itch and tickle of small creatures sharing the bed. Chroniclers even joked that fleas were bedfellows, ever faithful companions through cold nights. Though unpleasant, these intrusions became part of life's rhythm, endured with weary resignation. Pilgrims, after long days of walking, often mark their evenings with simple songs before settling to rest. Gathered in barns, fields, or church porches, they sang hymns or chants in low voices, thanking God for safe passage and asking protection for the road ahead. Some songs were repetitive, designed to lull weary minds into peace, while others carried stories of saints and miracles. The sound of dozens of tired voices rising and falling together under the stars must have been both haunting and comforting, a reminder of shared purpose. Afterward, cloaks were spread on the ground, heads rested on bundles of clothing, and sleep came quickly beneath the open sky. Sleeping near the hearth was believed to bring both comfort and luck. In cottages, the hearth was the heart of the home, and its dying embers gave off enough warmth to make the nearby floor a coveted spot. Children often curled close to the fire's glow, soothed by its crackle and warmth. Some traditions even claimed that newlyweds who slept by the hearth during their first nights would enjoy a long, prosperous marriage. The ashes were thought to carry protective power, warding off spirits and illness. To fall asleep with one's face lit by the red glow of coals was more than comfort. It was to lie in the shelter of fortune itself. Thus, the medieval night was always more than silence and shadows. It was shaped by pests endured, songs sung and fires treasured, each element turning sleep into an experience far richer and stranger than simple rest. Hospitality in the medieval world often meant sharing one's bed with a guest. In homes where space was scarce, offering half of one's mattress, or a place on the straw pallet beside the family, was seen as kindness rather than inconvenience. Travellers expected it, and hosts provided it without shame. To sleep side by side with a guest was a sign of trust, a way of proving generosity and welcome. Sometimes the arrangement even carried unspoken rules. The guest slept nearest the wall, the host nearest the door, guarding against danger. Though strange to modern sensibilities, this intimacy was an ordinary extension of the communal life that defined medieval villages. Moonlit dreams were said to be different from others. People believed that if the moon shone directly on a sleeper's face, their dreams would be unusually vivid, perhaps even prophetic. Some swore that moonlight brought restless visions, wandering through strange landscapes, hearing voices, or feeling the weight of spirits near the bed. Parents sometimes covered a child's face with cloth on full moon nights, lest the brightness stir their imagination too strongly. Yet others welcomed such dreams, hoping that the moon, with its shifting cycles, carried messages of change or renewal. In this way, even the play of silver light across a chamber floor became a part of the dream world's language. Night bells were another rhythm of medieval sleep. Churches rang them to mark hours of prayer, rousing monks but also echoing into nearby towns. The bells at midnight and before dawn reminded layfolk of sacred time, dividing the night into chapters much like the day. For villagers who woke easily, these tolls became familiar companions, drifting into half-heard memory as they turned in their straw beds. Some found comfort in the sound, a reassurance that the world was being kept in order even as they slept. Others grumbled that the bells broke their rest, but few dared complain. The bells were the voice of the church, and their presence in the night was as certain as the stars. These customs, offering one's bed, guarding against the moon, listening to bells, wove the fabric of medieval rest. They remind us that sleep was not private or silent, but shared, watched, and shaped by the world outside the bedchamber walls. Soldiers in camp knew little of comfortable sleep. On campaign, they rested where they could, on bare ground, in makeshift tents, or beneath the open sky. Cloaks doubled as blankets and saddles as pillows. Fires were kept burning at the camp's edge, guarded by sentries who took turns staying awake. For the rank and file, sleep came in short bursts, always ready to be broken by the sound of a trumpet or the cry of alarm. Horses shifted and stamped nearby, their presence both comfort and warning. In such settings, sleep was shallow, more survival than restoration, yet it was part of the rhythm of a soldier's life. Rest was never complete, but always enough to march again at dawn. Fires haunted the imagination of sleepers everywhere. For wooden houses and thatched roofs were tinder waiting to ignite. Families often ended the day with prayers for protection from flames. Children were taught rhymes that asked saints to keep the spark in the hearth and not in the roof. In towns, curfew bells warned people to cover their fires before bed, banking coals under ash. Yet sparks could still leap, and so some households placed buckets of water near the door before lying down. To dream of fire was taken seriously. It could mean danger ahead. Some even believed that restless tossing in bed was the body sensing fire nearby, a kind of instinctive warning in sleep. Dreams also offered a way to wash away guilt. Confessors sometimes told penitents that if they prayed sincerely before bed, God might grant them cleansing dreams, visions in which they felt forgiven or were shown symbols of peace, like doves or flowing water. Waking from such a dream was considered a sign that one's heart was lighter, one's soul freed from its burden. People recorded such visions in diaries and sermons, sharing them as proof that divine mercy could reach even into sleep. In this way, dreams were not only strange messages or portents, but also a balm for troubled consciences, a silent confession spoken between the soul and the night. Thus, the medieval bed held not only bodies but fears, prayers, and hopes. Soldiers guarded their rest, families prayed against fire, and sinners sought peace in dreams. Sleep was always more than slumber. It was a fragile passage through which safety, faith, and forgiveness all travelled together. Winter brought with it a particular weight to the nights. With the sun vanishing early and the cold stretching long, families sometimes spent more hours in bed than they wished, not from comfort, but necessity. Firewood was scarce, candles too precious to burn all evening, so households retired soon after dusk. Long nights invited both rest and unease, for the sheer length of darkness gave more space for dreams, worries, and midnight wanderings. Some chroniclers described villagers feeling that winter sleep was heavier, as though the body sank deeper into itself, only to wake groggy with the pale light of dawn. These extended nights were endured with patience, folded into the slow rhythm of the season. Protective objects often hung above medieval beds, small talismans against the unseen. A sprig of rowan might be nailed to the rafters to ward off witches. Knotted cords, believed to trap evil spirits, dangled quietly in corners. In some homes, carved wooden faces or painted charms were placed near the headboard, glaring outward to scare away trouble. Mothers sometimes wove little crosses from straw and tied them above cradles, where the soft rustle of the charm was thought to soothe the baby as much as the protection itself. These objects blurred the line between faith and superstition, part shield, part comfort, always present as the sleeper drifted off. In certain inns, patrons were offered a peculiar service, singers who would lull them to sleep. These were often young apprentices or travelling musicians hired cheaply by the innkeeper. After the noisy evening faded, the singer would remain, strumming a soft tune or humming a chant until the room of weary travellers drifted into rest. In crowded chambers filled with strangers sharing beds, the sound gave a unifying calm, like a thread tying all the sleepers together. It was less about melody and more about rhythm, gentle, steady, repeating, until the snores of guests rose to join it. Such services were rare, but travellers who experienced them often recalled them fondly, a brief touch of gentleness in the rough road of medieval life. These customs, long nights endured in winter, charms swaying above the bed, songs softening the edges of rest, remind us again that sleep in the Middle Ages was never simple. It was full of rituals and meanings, a fragile bridge stretched across the dark. When nightmares struck, many turned to holy relics for protection. A tiny fragment of a saint's bone, a scrap of cloth said to have touched a shrine, or even water blessed at a holy well might be placed beneath the pillow. Some slept with rosaries curled in their hands, believing that the beads would frighten away evil spirits. Others hung little reliquaries above the bed so their presence would guard the sleeper. To dream badly and wake trembling was not just an inconvenience, it was thought to be a spiritual attack. Relics, therefore, were seen as shields, as though the holiness of saints could extend into the shadows of the night. Dreams themselves were often carried to priests, who listened as villagers described what they had seen. A farmer might report a dream of wolves prowling around his home, asking whether it meant misfortune. A mother might confess that her child dreamed of falling, worried it was a sign of sickness to come. Priests interpreted these visions through scripture or offered reassurance, reminding the faithful that not all dreams carried weight. Still, many parishioners trusted these consultations, seeing them as a way to untangle the mysteries of their own subconscious. By morning, a troubling dream could be transformed into a spiritual lesson, its power softened by explanation. Out in the fields and on the walls of towns, guards and shepherds fought against sleep in their own way. Alone or in pairs, they told each other stories to pass the long hours. Shepherds, tending flocks under moonlight, swapped folk tales of fairy rings and wandering spirits. Guards on city walls recounted legends of kings or gossiped about townsfolk below. The rhythm of storytelling kept their minds alert, their bodies awake despite fatigue. These tales often blurred into chants or songs, their voices carrying softly through the night. For those who listened in secret, from cottages nearby or from tents on the road, these stories became part of the night's soundscape, blending with the wind and the silence. Thus sleep and sleeplessness were woven together, relics to guard the bed, priests to untangle dreams, watchmen and shepherds filling the night with voices. The medieval dark was never empty. It was a living fabric of fear, faith, and human companionship. Eclipses stirred special unease when it came to sleep. A darkened moon or sun was seen as a disruption to the natural order, and people believed it unsettled the rhythms of rest. On nights of lunar eclipses, villagers sometimes stayed awake, fearing that dreams under such skies would be twisted or dangerous. Some mothers kept children close, whispering prayers until the shadow passed. Others scattered ashes across the hearth as protection, believing it created a barrier against evil slipping in. Though few understood the science behind eclipses, their rarity made them moments of awe and fear, nights when even the thought of sleep seemed fragile. Bedtime sayings were passed down through generations, quiet words spoken before lying down. Some were simple wishes for safety. Sleep soft, wake whole. Others carried warnings like, turn your pillow thrice and no witch shall trouble thee. Families recited them as naturally as prayers, half tradition, half charm. In many villages, parents told children to always wash their hands and faces before bed, not only for cleanliness but to keep dreams pure. These sayings gave shape to the act of rest, turning it into something ritualistic, a thread binding generations together in the hush before sleep. Taverns, though noisy by day and evening, often became shared dormitories by night. After the last drink was poured and the music faded, embers from the great hearth glowed warmly. Travellers too poor to afford a proper bed were allowed to sleep in the common room, spreading their cloaks on the floor near the fire. The heat was uneven, strongest for those closest, weakest for those at the edges, but even a trace of warmth was prized on a cold night. The smell of smoke, ale, and charred wood lingered as the room quieted, broken only by snores and the occasional crack of settling timber. To drift to sleep there was to lie in a crowd of strangers, all bound together by the glow of a single hearth. These beliefs and customs, restless nights under eclipses, murmured sayings in families, bodies gathered by the warmth of tavern fires, add yet more threads to the medieval night. Sleep was never only an act of the body, it was a ritual shaped by earth, sky, and community alike. Owls were considered uncanny companions of the night, their calls often tied to superstition. To hear an owl near the home was sometimes taken as an omen of death, yet others believed it warned only of a restless night ahead. Farmers might toss a handful of salt onto the fire if an owl hooted too close, hoping to break the spell of bad fortune. For children, the haunting cry could be frightening, so parents softened the tale, saying the owl was a night watchman, calling to keep away spirits. Whether feared or reimagined, the owl's voice threaded itself into the fabric of medieval sleep, a sound both unsettling and strangely reassuring in its constancy. Infants were often tied or wrapped to keep them safe while sleeping. Swaddling was the common practice, binding babies tightly in cloth so they would not scratch themselves or roll into danger. Some families even used cradles with straps, securing the child in place while rocking the bed gently through the night. The belief was that a firmly bound infant slept more soundly, protected not only from accidents, but also from wandering spirits said to target the unguarded young. Mothers laid charms above cradles, little crosses or strings of beads, adding layers of comfort beyond the simple swaddle. To drift into sleep as a child in such a bed was to be wrapped not only in cloth but in the hopes and fears of an entire household. Festivals often blurred the line between sleep and wakefulness. During great celebrations like midsummer or harvest feasts, villagers sometimes stayed awake all night, drinking, singing, and dancing until dawn. Those too weary to continue would collapse where they stood, on hay bales under wagons or on the grass by the fire, dozing while music still echoed in their ears. These half-sleeps, surrounded by laughter and song, felt like dreams lived with eyes half open. Some said that in such nights visions came more easily, the border between waking and dreaming softened by merriment. For a moment, the ordinary rules of rest dissolved, replaced by something communal, chaotic, and strangely magical. Owls in the rafters, babies in swaddles, villagers collapsing by bonfires. Each image shows how medieval sleep was tangled with sound, ritual, and celebration. Rest was not always quiet or private. It was folded into the life of the community and the rhythms of nature around it. Sleep-talking was treated with both curiosity and unease. Some believed words muttered in sleep were secret truths slipping out, confessions carried by dreams. Others feared they were the whispers of spirits, using the sleeper's mouth as their own. Remedies varied, sprinkling holy water on the pillow, tying a knot in the bed sheets, or repeating the Lord's Prayer softly beside the bed until the sleeper quieted. Families often laughed about sleep talkers at breakfast, but in darker corners of belief their midnight ramblings were written down and puzzled over, as though hidden messages might be hiding in the jumble of words. Fairies were thought to wander most freely in the quiet hours of night, and many households took measures to keep them at bay. Breadcrumbs were sometimes left on the windowsill as an offering, so fairies would take the food and not the rest of the family's peace. Some believed fairies could slip into dreams, tangling the mind with strange visions or leaving sleepers fairy-struck, waking groggy and weak. To guard against this, iron scissors were placed near cradles, or bowls of milk were set out by the hearth. Children were warned never to leave shoes turned upside down overnight, for that gave fairies a doorway into the home. Sleep in this way was not only about rest, but also about defending one's slumber against invisible visitors. In towns and villages alike, night watch fires changed the way people slept. Bonfires or lanterns were sometimes lit at crossroads or near gates, meant to discourage thieves and guide late travellers. Their glow spilled faintly into nearby homes, a reassurance against total darkness. For some, the flicker of firelight on the wall was as soothing as the sound of a lullaby. Yet others muttered that too much light disturbed true rest, for the body needed shadow as much as warmth. Still, those watchfires burned steadily, their smoke curling into the night sky, marking the presence of vigilance as families slept. Thus the medieval night was full of voices, of sleep talkers, of fairies imagined at the window, of fires crackling beyond the shutters. Sleep was never simple silence, but a balance of guarding and surrender, a world where even dreams had to be protected. Snow changed the very sound of medieval sleep. Heavy snowfall muffled the world outside, softening footsteps, muting voices, and wrapping villages in an unusual hush. Many remarked that sleep during such nights felt deeper, as though the silence pressed people more firmly into their beds. Yet snow also brought unease. Drifting flakes piling against shutters made rooms darker than usual, and strange shapes in the moonlit drifts could spark fearful imagination. Some said snow carried a kind of enchantment, lulling dreamers into gentler visions. Others warned that if you dreamed of being buried in snow, it meant illness would soon visit the household. Either way, snowy nights gave sleep a weight and mystery unlike any other season. In crowded households, sleep was sometimes taken in shifts. Large families with limited bedding could not all lie down at once, so parents and older children might rest first, while others sat by the fire, tending it until it was their turn to sleep. Apprentices and servants, too, often rose early to begin chores, while masters slept a little longer, rotating rest as the day demanded. This constant exchange meant the house was never fully asleep nor fully awake, but in a state of half-silence, with some dreaming while others worked. It blurred the line between night and day, a rhythm born not of choice but necessity. Bells tied to doors were another curious protection against the night. Some families fastened small metal bells to entrances, believing they would ring if a spirit tried to enter. The faint jingle in the dark was reassuring, a sign that invisible forces were being kept at bay. In towns, bells were also hung in stables and barns, thought to protect animals from witches or thieves. The sound of a sudden bell at night could stir unease, but as long as no harm followed, it was said to mean the household had been guarded. To fall asleep with that faint metallic comfort nearby was to trust that both seen and unseen threats were being watched over. Snow, shifts of slumber, and bells at the threshold, each added to the layers of medieval sleep. Night was never an empty span of hours, but a landscape of rituals and protections shaped by season, space, and belief. Dreams were sometimes seen not just as messages, but as cures in themselves. If a sick person dreamed of drinking cool water, it was thought to signal recovery. To dream of walking through a green field might mean strength was returning, while a dream of being bathed suggested the body was being cleansed of illness. Some physicians even advised patients to pray for healing dreams before bed, believing that the mind could summon health through the images it created. Families, hopeful and watchful, often asked the sick upon waking what visions had come, taking comfort in signs that better days lay ahead. In harsh winters, when cottages grew unbearably cold, families sometimes slept in barns among their animals, The body heat of cows, sheep and goats warmed the air far better than a smouldering hearth indoors. Straw bedding was spread thick on the ground, and children often nestled between animals as if they were living blankets. The low sound of chewing, the soft huff of breath, and the warmth of wool surrounded the sleepers. Though unusual by today's standards, such arrangements were practical and even comforting, a reminder that humans and animals shared the struggle of surviving winter together. Night wanderers stirred a different kind of unease. Those seen walking the streets at odd hours were often regarded with suspicion, thought to be cursed souls or sinners too restless to find peace. Some believed they were servants of witches, scouting under cover of darkness. Others whispered they might be the spirits of the dead, trapped between worlds. Even innocents, travellers arriving late, or workers heading to early chores, risked being mistaken for something ominous if spotted after curfew. To lie awake and hear footsteps outside in the middle of the night was enough to set hearts racing, as if the boundary between safety indoors and danger outside had grown perilously thin. These customs, dreams as remedies, barns as winter bedrooms, and the haunting of night wanderers show once more how medieval sleep was never simple. It was threaded with hope, practicality and fear, each night a passage shaped by both the ordinary and the unseen. Bed curtains were not merely decoration but powerful symbols of privacy. In castles and manor houses, great four-poster beds were surrounded with heavy drapes that could be pulled shut, creating a small world within. These curtains trapped warmth, muffled sound, and gave sleepers a sense of safety in otherwise draughty halls filled with servants or guards. Even in humbler homes, cloth hangings were sometimes strung around beds, patched from old garments or woven from coarse wool. To draw the curtain was to separate oneself from the bustle of the household, retreating into a private chamber of rest. Behind those folds, whispers, prayers, and dreams unfolded in a space that felt hidden from the eyes of the world. Odd foods were sometimes eaten before bed to ward off nightmares. Cheese mixed with herbs was one curious remedy, though some said cheese caused bad dreams instead. An argument carried on across households and even noted in old writings. A spoonful of honey was believed to sweeten not only the tongue but the night's visions. Garlic, though pungent, was sometimes chewed as protection against evil spirits slipping into dreams. In towns where exotic spices could be bought, nutmeg or cinnamon was grated into warm milk, praised for calming the stomach and mind alike. These bedtime foods were less about flavour than about faith, that the body could be guided toward gentle rest through what it consumed before sleep. Ghosts were thought to appear most often in dreams, not to frighten, but to deliver unfinished messages. A deceased relative might visit a sleeper to warn them of danger, to remind them of a debt unpaid, or to ask for prayers to ease their soul's journey. People who awoke from such dreams often lit candles or gave alms in response, believing they had been touched by the needs of the dead. These encounters blurred the border between worlds, making sleep a liminal space where living and departed could meet. To medieval families, such dreams were solemn, reminders that rest itself was never free from the presence of those who'd gone before. Thus the medieval bed, with its curtains, its curious snacks, and its dreams haunted by spirits, was more than a place of rest. It was a chamber of warmth, protection, ritual, and mystery, holding the body while the mind and soul wandered far. Midsummer carried its own rituals for sleep. On the eve of St. John's Day, people often scattered herbs across their beds, mugwort, fennel, or vervain, believing they would ward off evil spirits during the short enchanted night. Some tucked sprigs beneath pillows, hoping to dream of their future spouse. Children were told that if they slept on freshly cut flowers, their dreams would be blessed with luck for the coming year. The mingled scent of herbs and blossoms filled cottages, turning sleep into part of the festival itself. To rest in such a bed was to feel cradled not only by blankets, but by nature's protective hand. Yet not all night visitors were welcome. Tales of the night hag spread across Europe, describing a shadowy figure that pressed upon sleepers' chests, leaving them breathless and terrified. Today we might call it sleep paralysis, but to medieval people it was a demonic attack, evidence that the unseen world could intrude upon slumber. To guard against the hag, iron objects were placed by the bed, prayers recited before sleep, and charms hung from rafters. Some even left a light burning all night, believing the hag feared fire. Though frightening, these stories gave shape to the universal experience of the night terrors, turning them into battles between good and evil fought silently in the dark. Protective rhymes were another shield against the night. Many families taught children to repeat simple verses 3 times before bed, believing the number carried sacred power. One common rhyme asked angels to guard the 4 corners of the bed. Another promised that no thief, witch, or spirit could enter as long as the words were spoken with faith. These chants, whispered in the stillness, soothed anxious hearts as much as they invoked divine aid. To repeat them was to weave a net of sound around the bed, each word a thread of safety holding back the darkness until morning came. With herbs scattered, rhymes spoken, and even fears of the hag held at bay, medieval sleep became not just rest but a ritual of survival, full of gestures meant to guide the sleeper safely through the long hours of the night. Dream incubation was sometimes practiced in monasteries and shrines, where sleep itself became a tool for seeking divine messages. Pilgrims might spend the night lying on the cold floor of a chapel, or near the relics of a saint, hoping that in their dreams the holy figure would appear and offer guidance. Monks recorded such visions, treating them as revelations. To those who took part, the act of deliberately sleeping in a sacred place blurred the line between prayer and slumber, turning rest into an act of devotion. Whether they dreamed or not, many awoke, believing they had been touched by something greater, carrying that certainty with them back into their waking lives. Holy wells, too, became woven into sleep rituals. Some people travelled to these springs not only for healing waters, but to rest nearby. It was said that sleeping beside a well on certain feast nights could bring visions of health, fertility, or future fortune. Parents sometimes laid sick children near these sites overnight, trusting that the mingling of fresh air, flowing water, and sacred blessing would ease their illness. Even the sound of the bubbling spring was thought to soothe rest, like a divine lullaby echoing through the stillness of night. Yawning at midnight carried its own peculiar danger. People whispered that an open mouth in the darkest hour could invite spirits to slip inside. To guard against this, some crossed themselves quickly after a yawn, while others murmured a short prayer under their breath. Children were warned to cover their mouths at night, not only for manners but for protection. Though it might sound like simple superstition, it gave meaning to small, ordinary gestures, turning even a yawn into a reminder of how thin the veil between body and spirit seemed in the medieval imagination. In monasteries, by wells, and in the privacy of a yawn, sleep remained bound to faith and fear alike. It was never merely unconsciousness, but a nightly passage through spaces where the sacred and the strange were always near. Summer brought its own unease with long, lingering twilights. The sun seemed reluctant to leave, painting the sky with colours that stretched far into the evening. Families found it harder to fall asleep when the air was still bright, and some whispered that spirits grew bold in those hours between day and night, when the world was neither fully dark nor fully light. Children tossed restlessly, claiming they could see shapes in the half-lit fields. To ease the household, elders told stories of twilight as a protective veil, when angels themselves walked among the shadows to watch over sleepers. In this way, unease was reshaped into comfort, helping eyes finally close despite the late glow outside. Teeth grinding at night, what we might now call bruxism, was noticed and treated with curious remedies. Some healers suggested placing a piece of soft wood or leather in the mouth before bed, so the grinding would wear on that instead of teeth. Others prescribed rubbing the jaw with warmed oils of sage or mint. More superstitious households believed tooth grinding meant the sleeper was being visited by a restless spirit, and they set bowls of water by the bedside to trap the presence before it could cause harm. Whether through herbs, wood, or whispered prayers, the grinding was given meaning, not dismissed as random noise. Blankets themselves became part of ghostly lore. People said wandering souls might tug at the covers of the living, as though trying to share their warmth or deliver a message. A sudden slip of the blanket in the night could startle a sleeper into believing they had been touched by the unseen. To prevent this, some tucked the edges of blankets under the mattress, others laid small crosses atop the bedclothes. Children were reassured that if they pulled the blanket over their heads, no spirit could reach them. Such beliefs turned even the weight of wool into a protective shield, a barrier between the vulnerable sleeper and whatever drifted in the dark. Thus, twilight skies, clenched jaws, and shifting blankets all became part of the medieval language of sleep. Ordinary details transformed into signs and symbols, carrying both fear and comfort into the hours of rest. Astrology guided not only farming and medicine, but even the act of sleep. Some physicians claimed certain zodiac signs favoured restful slumber, while others made the mind restless. Manuals advised that beginning one's rest while the moon was in a cold sign like Cancer or Pisces would bring deep, healing sleep, whereas fiery signs like Aries or Leo might stir vivid dreams. A few households even arranged their sleeping positions according to the stars, with heads turned toward auspicious directions depending on the night sky. Though such practices sound strange today, they reveal how tightly medieval people wove heaven and earth together, believing the stars governed even their moments of rest. In times of illness or grief, the practice of rocking adults to sleep was not unheard of. Just as infants were calmed in cradles, grown men and women, weakened by fever or sorrow, were sometimes laid in chairs or beds that could sway gently. Family members or servants rocked them with patience, the rhythmic motion thought to soothe body and spirit alike. Some healers even recommended it, claiming the swaying lulled troubled humours into balance. Imagine the quiet creak of wood, the steady back and forth, and the soft murmurs of prayer, a tender, almost childlike return to comfort, granting rest when none would come naturally. Sleepwalking was often linked to the pull of the moon. Villagers said that those who walked at night did so because the moonlight called them out of their beds. To see someone wandering with blank eyes under a silver sky was unsettling, and great care was taken not to startle them, lest their spirit be trapped outside their body. Instead, families guided sleepwalkers gently back to bed, sometimes drawing protective circles of ash around the threshold to keep them from leaving again. Physicians blamed imbalance in the brain, but common folk trusted the moon was the culprit, its mysterious glow tugging on sleepers like a tide. Thus stars charted bedtime, rocking chairs soothed the restless, and the moon itself was believed to lure bodies into motion. Sleep was not a simple silence. It was a dance with the heavens, the body swayed by forces far larger than itself. Pillows were sometimes stitched with charms hidden deep inside their stuffing. Mothers slipped scraps of parchment bearing short prayers into the seams, believing the words would guard their children as they slept. Herbal sachets, lavender, chamomile, or mugwort, were sewn into cloth bundles and tucked within feathers or straw, lending both fragrance and protection. In wealthier homes, embroidered pillowcases carried stitched blessings, each thread a prayer woven into fabric. For many, a pillow was not just a cushion for the head, but a quiet shield, a vessel carrying whispered hopes into the world of dreams. The phrase "sleeping with one eye open" had a literal edge in medieval thought. Some believed certain people could never fully close both eyes at once, a sign of vigilance or even of a curse. Warriors were praised for resting lightly, always half aware, as though their souls hovered at the threshold between wakefulness and slumber. Others feared that sleeping too deeply left the body vulnerable to spirits, so a restless, watchful sleep was sometimes considered safer. To doze in half-awareness, with one eye metaphorically open, was to place survival above comfort, a reminder of how precarious the night could feel. Travelling traders often carried their own bedding for luck. A blanket or cloak that had been slept under many times was thought to protect its owner, carrying familiar smells and memories that warded off bad dreams. Some stitched small coins or tokens into the corners, believing the bedding itself attracted fortune. Merchants spoke of restless nights when forced to use a stranger's cloth, as though sleep without one's own blanket carried risks. Even in crowded inns, a trader unrolled his bedding like a talisman, wrapping himself not just in warmth, but in the comfort of continuity. Thus, pillows, half-closed eyes, and lucky blankets show how medieval people layered protection into rest. Sleep was not only a surrender, but also a careful preparation. Each object and habit meant to guide the sleeper safely through the fragile hours of darkness. Hand-washing before bed was a nightly ritual in many homes, blending hygiene with superstition. Water was poured from a jug into a basin, and family members rinsed their hands, sometimes their faces, before settling into bed. Priests encouraged it as a sign of purity, cleansing both body and soul before sleep. Some households believed that going to bed with unwashed hands invited evil spirits, who could cling to the dirt and trouble dreams. Others thought clean hands brought better fortune, ensuring one would wake whole at dawn. The simple act of dipping fingers into cool water became a moment of transition, a quiet ceremony marking the passage from day into night. Mirrors were often avoided in sleeping chambers. People feared that mirrors left uncovered could capture the soul as it wandered in dreams, trapping it inside the glass. Some covered mirrors with cloth at night, while others removed them from the room entirely. To wake in darkness and glimpse one's reflection was thought to be dangerous, as though the face in the glass might not be one's own, but a spirit mimicking the sleeper. Even polished metal surfaces were treated with caution, turned away or hidden after dusk. In this way, mirrors became objects of unease, symbols of the thin line between self and shadow. Benches were sometimes dragged across doors at night, not just as locks but as barriers against spirits. In cottages without sturdy bolts, a heavy bench pressed against the threshold gave a sense of security. Yet people also whispered that such barriers discouraged wandering souls from entering, since spirits were thought to slip easily through openings. A blocked door signalled resistance, a way of telling the unseen that the family inside was guarded. Children who asked why the benches were moved each night were told simply to keep trouble out. Whether for thieves or spirits, the gesture gave peace of mind, letting households rest more easily through the long hours. Thus water, mirrors and benches all shaped the nightly journey into slumber. Each act, washing, covering, securing, was a small ritual of protection, turning sleep from a simple habit into a sacred passage carefully tended by custom. Candles were sometimes left burning at the foot of the bed, a practice both practical and protective. Their faint glow helped guide anyone who stirred in the night, preventing stumbles in dark rooms. More importantly, light was thought to repel spirits and keep nightmares at bay. Some families lit a single candle and let it burn low until dawn, even though wax was precious. In noble households, servants might tend the flame, ensuring it never went out. To sleep with a candle glowing near one's feet was to rest in the belief that darkness itself could be held back, the flickering flame a silent sentinel against the unknown. Diet, too, was believed to shape the texture of dreams. Physicians warned against heavy meats before bed, claiming they clogged the stomach and caused fiery, disturbing visions. Light foods, like bread and milk, were recommended for peaceful rest. Cheese was hotly debated. Some argued it stirred nightmares, while others claimed certain cheeses encouraged prophetic dreams. Sweet fruits were said to bring gentle dreams of abundance, while onions or garlic might summon odd, twisted visions. Each bite before bed was thought to echo in the mind, turning digestion into a kind of alchemy that spilled into sleep. Pillows carried not only charms, but also secrets. Children and adults alike were known to whisper their worries, confessions or hopes into pillows before drifting off, believing the soft cloth absorbed and held their words. Some thought the act of voicing troubles aloud, even to an inanimate object, lessened their weight, leaving the mind freer for slumber. Lovers whispered the names of those they longed for, hoping dreams would bring them visions of their faces. Parents encouraged children to tell their pillows about fears, so that by morning the worries would fade. In this way, pillows became silent confidants, cradling not only heads, but hearts as they rested. Candles, diet, and whispered words each turned the medieval bed into a stage for ritual and meaning. Sleep was never only the closing of eyes, but a woven fabric of light, food, and secrets carried into the hush of dreams. Storms were both feared and cherished in the medieval imagination. The roar of thunder and the lash of rain on thatched roofs often startled children awake, and many families huddled together during the worst of the night. Yet some believed storms could purify the air, driving away evil spirits and cleansing the world for safer sleep. Parents reassured little ones by saying thunder was the sound of angels bowling in heaven, a playful explanation that softened fear. Still, many whispered prayers when lightning flashed too close, asking for protection from fire or flood. Sleep on such nights came in fits and starts, mingled with awe at the power of the skies. Bed frames themselves sometimes carried charms worked into their wood. Carvers etched small crosses, stars, or sacred initials into the posts and headboards, believing these markings created a spiritual barrier. In humble homes, rough scratches were enough, while wealthier families commissioned intricate symbols hidden in the grain of the wood. Over time, the bed became not just furniture but a protective space, a sanctuary marked against unseen forces. Each creak of timber in the night was softened by the thought that the very wood had been blessed or inscribed with holy power. And then there was the belief in angels standing at the four corners of the bed. Parents taught children that heavenly guardians watched from each side, keeping harm away while they dreamed. Some prayers invoked this image directly, asking angels to take their stations and hold vigil until dawn. The idea turned the bed into a fortress, ringed with invisible protectors whose wings stretched outward into the shadows. To lie down with this picture in mind was to feel wrapped not only in blankets, but in the comfort of divine company. Storms raging outside, charms carved into wood, angels guarding in silence, all these images reveal how medieval sleep was layered with sound, ritual, and faith. Night was never just emptiness but a living world shaped by fear and comfort intertwined. Colours were thought to carry power, even in bedclothes. White linens were considered pure, suited for peaceful sleep and untroubled dreams. Red, on the other hand, was thought to ward off evil, its brightness a warning to spirits that the sleeper was protected. Blue, rare and precious in dyed fabrics, was linked to the Virgin Mary and believed to bring divine calm. Families without dyed cloth sometimes laid coloured ribbons or scraps of fabric over their beds, trusting the shades themselves to influence what unfolded in the night. To close one's eyes beneath such coverings was to surrender not only to comfort, but to a palette of unseen meaning. Sudden wakings in the night, what we might call startling awake, were treated with great seriousness. If someone sat up suddenly, heart pounding, it was believed they had been brushed by a spirit or stirred by an omen. Remedies included crossing oneself immediately, drinking a sip of water left at the bedside, or whispering a short prayer before lying back down. Some households even placed a bit of bread on a windowsill, offering it to wandering spirits in exchange for peace. These small gestures turned an ordinary jolt of the body into a moment of ritual, easing the sleeper back into rest. Perhaps the most powerful belief of all was that the soul left the body during sleep. Many medieval writers described dreams as journeys of the soul, wandering beyond flesh to glimpse other realms. A gentle dream might mean the soul had visited heaven, while a nightmare suggested it had strayed too near darker places. People feared waking a sleeper too abruptly, lest the soul not yet have returned. Children were taught to lie still if they awoke in the night, giving their souls time to settle back into their bodies. In this way, sleep was treated not simply as rest, but as a voyage, one that required both caution and reverence. Colours, sudden wakings, and wandering souls each shows how the medieval night was never empty. Sleep was a threshold, a crossing into mystery, shaped by symbols, fears, and faith in equal measure. Animals often acted as guardians of sleep. Dogs, in particular, were welcomed at the foot of the bed, their keen senses providing comfort against intruders or spirits. Their warmth was another gift, especially in the chill of winter when families valued every degree of heat. Cats, too, were sometimes allowed near sleepers, their silent watch believed to repel wandering spirits. Yet superstitions varied. Some feared a cat sleeping on the chest could steal the breath of a child, while others claimed their presence kept witches away. Whether trusted or doubted, animals were woven into the nighttime world, companions both practical and mystical. Relics sometimes found their way beneath mattresses, hidden close to the sleeper's body. A pilgrim's badge, a splinter of wood said to come from a saint's shrine, or even soil taken from a holy site might be tucked under the bed. These relics were thought to sanctify the very place of rest, creating a barrier against evil forces. For the devout, sleeping atop such sacred objects offered a sense of protection, as though the saints themselves kept vigil through the night. Though relics were treasured items, their power was not reserved for display alone. They became intimate companions in the most vulnerable hours of sleep. But the devil, too, was believed to seek his way into the dreams of men and women. Preachers warned that temptations whispered at night could take root in the soul by morning. Lustful dreams were seen as a sign of sin's presence, while nightmares of fire or falling were sometimes described as demonic assaults. To defend against this, people recited prayers before bed, placed crosses under pillows, or even sprinkled holy water over their sheets. A restless night was more than inconvenience. It was a battlefield of spirit and flesh, fought in silence beneath the blankets. Thus the medieval sleeper was never alone. Dogs and cats guarded them, relics sanctified their beds, and unseen battles between divine and demonic forces unfolded in the theatre of dreams. Sleeping upright was not as unusual in the Middle Ages as it might seem today. Many believed lying fully flat pressed the body too close to death, making one vulnerable to illness or evil spirits. Beds were often propped with bolsters, so sleepers rested at an angle, half reclined rather than stretched out. Nobles with feather pillows might pile them high, while poorer folk used wooden wedges or bundles of cloth. Physicians even recommended upright sleeping for those with weak lungs, believing it kept air moving through the body. To us it might sound uncomfortable, but for medieval people it was a posture of caution, rest without surrender, slumber that mimicked watchfulness. Midnight bells rang in more than monasteries. Their sound was believed to chase away demons and wandering spirits, breaking the dangerous silence of the darkest hours. Some towns rang bells specifically to mark the devil's hour, a reminder for people to cross themselves and murmur prayers before settling back into bed. The tolls echoed through sleeping streets, steady and solemn, like a protective chant made of iron and air. For villagers lying awake in their cottages, the sound was reassurance that the night had been broken, divided, and made safer by the church's voice. Herbs, too, were said to shape the truth of dreams. Mugwort was the most famous. Tucked beneath a pillow, it was believed to summon visions that revealed hidden knowledge. Sage was thought to sharpen memory in sleep, while chamomile soothed the mind into gentler dreams. In some regions, lovers exchanged sprigs of rosemary, hoping it would ensure they dreamed of one another. These small rituals made bedtime an act of quiet experimentation, a way of nudging the soul toward clarity while the body rested. To dream truly was a gift, proof that sleep could carry messages worth heeding. Thus, angled bodies, tolling bells, and pillows lined with herbs reveal yet again how medieval sleep was woven with vigilance and faith. Even in slumber, people sought ways to keep danger out and let truth slip quietly in. Hair carried a peculiar weight in medieval belief, even while sleeping. People were warned not to cut their hair too close to bedtime, for it was said to weaken the spirit and invite troubled dreams. Loose hair was thought to make one vulnerable. Women often braided or tied it before lying down, both to prevent tangles and to keep spirits from tugging at it in the night. Some households even burned stray hairs that fell out on pillows, fearing witches might collect them to cast spells. To rest with hair carefully bound was as much a ritual of protection as of grooming, a small gesture of control in a world full of uncertainty. Inns were notorious for their scarcity of blankets. When beds were shared among strangers, covers were rationed just as carefully as space. Some innkeepers provided only a single heavy woolen cover for an entire bed, forcing travellers to huddle close and negotiate their share. Quarrels sometimes broke out in the dark, accusations of blanket hogging recorded in humorous poems and tavern songs. Travellers often carried their own cloaks for this reason, using them as personal blankets to avoid such disputes. Still, on freezing nights, even the scratchiest communal cover was better than none, and many chose compromise over shivering. Crossroads were feared as dangerous places to sleep nearby, especially at night. Folklore held that spirits lingered where paths met, unable to move on, and that demons or witches favoured such spots for their gatherings. To rest too near a crossroads was to risk being disturbed, or worse, carried off, by forces beyond human sight. Travellers who had no choice often marked the ground with a cross before lying down, or kept iron at hand to ward off whatever roamed. Tales spread of dreamers who woke disoriented near crossroads, as though they had been toyed with by unseen hands. The lesson was clear: avoid such places after dark, for they were thresholds not only of roads, but of the living and the dead. Hair braided, blankets shared, crossroads shunned. Each adds another thread to the rich fabric of medieval sleep, a nightly passage guarded by habit, belief, and caution. Though mothers are most often imagined at cradlesides, fathers too played a role in soothing children to sleep. In many villages, fathers sang slower, simpler songs, chants with steady rhythm rather than flowing melodies. These lullabies often carried the tone of prayers or work songs, their rougher voices offering a grounding comfort. Some fathers sang ballads from their youth, or verses of psalms remembered from church. For a child, the deep hum of a father's song was less about words and more about presence, the reassurance that even the strongest in the household could bend their voice toward gentleness when night demanded calm. Bread, a daily staple, sometimes found a place in sleep remedies. A small crust soaked in warm milk was fed to restless children as a way to quiet their bodies before bed. In some traditions, crumbs of bread were scattered across the floor near the bed to distract evil spirits, who were thought to stop and count them, rather than disturb the sleeper. Others tucked bits of stale bread into pouches and hung them above beds, as charms against hunger dreams, visions of scarcity that haunted the poor. To sleep with bread near was to rest with both nourishment and protection close at hand. Owls perched on rooftops cast a particular chill through the medieval imagination. Their silent wings and sudden cries were seen as harbingers of ill fortune, especially if they lingered above a home for more than a night. Families sometimes clattered pots together to scare them away, or lit extra candles in windows to drive them off. Yet not all feared them. Some believed owls were messengers of wisdom, warning households of dangers yet unseen. Still, to drift into sleep with the eerie hoot overhead was to lie half in fear, half in wonder, uncertain whether the sound meant ruin or revelation. Fathers' songs, bread charms, and owls at the eaves all show again how medieval nights were alive with care, ritual, and trembling awe. Sleep was never empty. It was filled with voices, symbols, and omens circling close around the resting body. Fasting was closely tied to how people slept. During holy seasons like Lent, when meals were smaller and simpler, many noted that their dreams became sharper, stranger, and more vivid. Hunger was believed to open the body to visions, leaving the soul lighter and more receptive to messages. Some monks even practiced deliberate fasting to invite dream visions, treating the emptiness of the stomach as a door to divine whispers. For ordinary villagers, however, fasting often meant restless nights, bellies grumbling, bodies stirring, minds filled with images of food. Yet even this discomfort was interpreted spiritually, a reminder that the soul could feast on prayer when the body went without. Whistling at night was carefully avoided. People said the sound called spirits, drawing them closer to the home. Children were scolded if they whistled after dark, for parents feared it might invite mischief or, worse, direct the attention of the devil himself. In some places, whistling was linked to storms, as though the noise stirred winds into being. To hear a whistle in the distance while lying in bed could unsettle a whole household, leaving sleepers whispering prayers until silence returned. Thus the absence of whistling was its own comfort, a sign that the night was at peace. Headboards often carried carved faces, peering down on sleepers with watchful eyes. Some were simple folk designs, grimacing masks meant to scare away spirits, while others were carefully crafted images of saints or angels. The presence of these faces turned the bed into a guarded space, as though unseen company lingered nearby to protect the dreamer. For children, the carvings were both fascination and fear, a stern wooden gaze above them, frozen forever in silent watch. With time, such faces became part of the nightly landscape, guardians staring down through generations of sleep. So even in hunger, in silence, and in carved wood, medieval people found ways to shape their nights. Sleep was not only rest but ritual, each detail filled with meaning that carried them safely through to dawn. Midnight prayers were common among the devout, especially in monasteries but also within households. Many believed waking briefly in the middle of the night was not an accident, but a divine invitation to pray. Half asleep, people would murmur the Lord's Prayer or short psalms, sometimes still lying in bed, their voices barely audible. These prayers were said to guard the rest of the night's slumber, sealing it with faith before drifting back into dreams. To pause in the stillness, whisper a blessing, and surrender once more to sleep gave the night a rhythm, like two tides of rest divided by a moment of sacred interruption. Thunderstorms were thought to stir not only the living but also the restless dead. When thunder cracked across the sky, villagers sometimes imagined souls rising from graves, unsettled by the turmoil above. Families might cross themselves when lightning flashed, not only for safety from fire but also to keep wandering spirits away. In some regions, bells were rung during storms, their iron sound believed to calm the skies and push the dead back into their rest. Sleep under such conditions was uneasy, half comforted by ritual, half shaken by the belief that the night was alive with movement both heavenly and earthly. Shoes, humble as they were, sometimes played a role in nighttime protection. People placed them neatly beside the bed, toes pointing outward, so that any spirit entering the room would mistake the shoes for guardians and pass by. Others believed the shoes themselves carried the imprint of their owner's strength, anchoring the sleeper's soul in place through the night. For children, tiny shoes lined by the bedside reassured parents that fairies or witches would be confused, attacking the leather instead of the child. Even the simple presence of footwear became a charm, silently standing guard as families surrendered to sleep. Thus, half-awake prayers, rumbling storms, and worn shoes reveal once more how medieval nights were filled with quiet defences. Sleep was a surrender, yes, but never unguarded, always wrapped in rituals that gave meaning to every sound and shadow. Harvest season carried its own anxieties into the night. After long days of gathering crops, families collapsed into bed exhausted. Yet their sleep was often restless. The fear of storms destroying fields, or thieves stealing grain under cover of darkness, weighed heavily on their minds. Some villagers even took turns sleeping lightly in barns, guarding the stores of wheat or barley through the night. Dreams of abundance were welcomed as omens of a good harvest, while nightmares of barren fields could leave farmers uneasy for days. In these weeks, sleep was never quite free. It was a companion to labour, a fragile pause between the demands of soil and sky. Spinning wheels and looms, when left uncovered, were sometimes thought to tangle dreams. People believed that threads, still wound on their spindles, might catch the wandering soul of a sleeper and hold it captive until morning. To prevent this, women often covered their spinning work with cloth before bed, muttering a short prayer as they did. The sight of an idle wheel in a dark room carried an eerie weight, as though the silence of the tool was listening, waiting. To protect dreams from being ensnared, households learned to put their tools to rest, just as they put themselves. Rings, especially those blessed or engraved with symbols, were often worn into bed as protection. Some bore simple crosses, others carried stones thought to ward off illness or evil. People believed such rings anchored them, keeping spirits from pulling the soul away during dreams. Lovers, too, sometimes exchanged rings with the promise that wearing them at night would bring visions of each other. The weight of metal on a finger was more than ornament. It was a shield, a charm, and a tether to life and love alike. Harvest worries, hidden wheels, and guarding rings show once more how medieval sleep was never empty. Every object, every ritual carried meaning, turning the act of lying down into a ceremony of survival, faith, and quiet hope. Morning bells marked the official end of sleep in towns and villages. Long before alarm clocks, the church tower rang out at dawn, signalling both prayer and labour. For monks, the bell meant rising for matins or lauds, prayers that punctuated the rhythm of their day. For villagers, it was a call to fields, workshops and kitchens, a reminder that sleep had been long enough. The sound drifted through shutters, mingling with roosters and the stir of animals. Even those who wished for more rest could not ignore the bell. It was the voice of authority, breaking dreams and pulling the body back into the demands of daylight. The new moon carried its own curious warnings. Some believed that sleeping directly beneath its unseen face, especially outdoors, could drain a person's strength. Others whispered that new moon nights invited mischievous dreams, where trickster spirits led sleepers through strange, twisting paths. Families sometimes marked the first new moon of the season with small prayers before bed, asking for steady rest despite the darkened sky. By contrast, full moons were said to make dreams brighter, more vivid, sometimes prophetic. Thus, even the changing shape of the heavens was thought to reach through rooftops and into beds, shaping the very texture of slumber. Sick beds blurred the boundaries between ordinary sleep and the sleep of death. For the ill, rest was prescribed as medicine, yet families watched closely, fearful that each breath might be the last. Dreams told during sickness were treated with reverence. Visions of gardens or flowing water gave hope, while dreams of shadows or fire left loved ones shaken. Prayers were spoken over the sleeper, holy relics laid nearby. Candles kept burning to guard the fragile boundary between life and departure. In such beds, rest was no longer simple recovery. It was a vigil where sleep and eternity seemed to brush against one another. Thus, bells, moons, and sickbeds remind us that sleep was not just private rest, but a stage where time, faith, and mortality all met. The medieval night was full of endings and beginnings, woven tightly into the lives of those who closed their eyes. Sleeping near running water carried both comfort and caution. The gentle sound of streams was said to soothe dreams, lulling the mind with its rhythm. Yet some warned that sleeping too close to rivers or brooks could invite spirits, for water was believed to be a pathway between worlds. Travellers camping beside streams often left offerings, a crust of bread or a coin, so the water spirits would let them sleep undisturbed. In this way, water's song was both lullaby and warning, a reminder that even its quiet murmur belonged to forces beyond human control. Keys, humble objects of iron, sometimes served as protective charms under pillows. A key placed beneath the head was thought to lock the sleeper's soul inside the body, preventing spirits from drawing it away during dreams. Keys also symbolized safety for the home, so resting upon one was a silent pledge that both body and dwelling were secure through the night. Children were sometimes given small wooden keys for this purpose, tokens to guard against nightmares. To fall asleep with a key under the pillow was to rest with faith in both metal and meaning, locked fast against the dark. Certain nights of the year were considered too perilous for peaceful sleep. Midsummer's Eve, All Hallows' Eve, and the 12 nights of Christmas were times when spirits were believed to wander more freely. People often stayed awake later on such nights, sharing fireside stories or reciting prayers until fatigue carried them past the danger. Those who did sleep kept charms nearby, sprigs of holly, bowls of salt, or holy texts laid open beside the bed. On such nights, rest was taken warily, as though the walls between worlds were thinner, and dreams might open doors best left closed. Thus streams, keys, and fateful nights all shaped the way medieval people approached slumber. Sleep was never passive. It was a guarded crossing, full of care, ritual, and quiet awe. The direction of a bed mattered deeply in medieval thought. Many households placed beds so that sleepers' heads faced east, toward the rising sun. This orientation was believed to invite renewal, aligning the body with the promise of resurrection and the cycle of daylight. To face west, by contrast, was sometimes frowned upon, associated with endings and decline. In monasteries, this symbolism was even stricter. Monks were often laid in their final resting places facing east, and sleeping in the same position became a nightly echo of that hope. Thus, even the angle of a mattress carried spiritual weight, shaping how people settled into their dreams. Sleeping hats were common companions to rest, especially in draughty stone houses or wooden cottages. These simple woolen caps kept warmth from escaping, and protected sleepers from chills that crept in through cracks and shutters. But hats carried more than practical use. Some believed covering the head kept the mind calmer, holding in thoughts and shielding against wandering spirits. Children were sometimes tucked into bed with tiny caps, their parents reassuring them that the cloth not only kept them warm but also guarded their dreams. The soft weight of fabric on the brow became both comfort and charm. Silence, though prized today for sleep, sometimes unsettled medieval folk. Absolute quiet was rare, for nights were usually filled with the crackle of fires, the shifting of animals, or distant church bells. When silence fell completely, no wind, no birds, no movement, it was taken as an omen. Some whispered it meant witches were at work, or that death was passing through the village. In such stillness, sleepers often muttered prayers before daring to close their eyes, seeking comfort in the familiar rhythm of words. Silence itself became a presence, as heavy and mysterious as any shadow, reminding people that the night was alive even when it made no sound. East-facing beds, woolen caps, and haunted silences each shows again how medieval rest was wrapped in meaning. Sleep was never only the closing of eyes, but a ritual threaded with faith, fear, and fragile comfort. Holy water was not only for churches. Many families used it in their homes as part of bedtime ritual. A few drops sprinkled across the sheets or over the bed frame were thought to drive away demons and keep dreams pure. Mothers sometimes dipped their fingers and touched the foreheads of children before tucking them in, blessing them against nightmares. Travellers carried small vials to sanctify strange beds in inns, believing it sealed a circle of safety in unfamiliar places. To lie down in a bed blessed with holy water was to surrender with greater peace, trusting that sacred protection wrapped as tightly as the blankets themselves. The custom of leaving one candle unlit carried curious meaning. In some households, a cluster of candles was placed near the bed, but only all but one were lit. The unlit candle symbolized humility, a recognition that human protection was incomplete, leaving space for divine guardianship. Others believed that an unlit candle stood watch in the realm of spirits, a beacon for angels while keeping darker forces at bay. The very presence of an untouched candle gave balance to the night, a reminder that safety rested in both light and restraint. Sudden chills at night were often explained as more than just drafts. People believed that a cold shiver sweeping across the body meant a spirit had passed nearby, brushing against the sleeper. Some even claimed that if a child shivered in their sleep, it was because angels had touched them gently, keeping watch. Adults, however, feared such chills as signs of darker visitors, prompting hurried prayers or the drawing of blankets higher. Whether angel or spirit, the sensation carried weight, reminders that the invisible world could draw close in the quiet hours. Holy drops of water, darkened candles, and mysterious chills all reveal again how medieval people treated the night as a living presence. Sleep was never only the body's rest. It was an act of trust, layered with small defences against the mysteries just beyond sight. Night clothes were sometimes more than fabric. Mothers and wives sewed tiny charms into hems or cuffs, bits of thread knotted in sacred patterns, small patches of cloth that had been blessed, or even a bead from a rosary stitched discreetly inside. These hidden tokens were believed to guard the sleeper as surely as armour, unseen but ever present. Some families even reused the same nightshirts for generations, trusting that each stitch carried forward the protection of those who'd worn it before. To slip into such garments was to be wrapped not only in warmth, but in the quiet guardianship of tradition. Birds calling at midnight stirred deep unease. A cock crowing too early was thought to signal that spirits were abroad, disrupting the order of night and day. Owls, already shadowed with superstition, were especially feared if they hooted near a window after midnight. Some said such calls meant a death was near. Others believed it was simply a warning to pray. In households where these sounds pierced the dark, people often whispered charms or crossed themselves quickly before lying back down. Birds that woke the night were never just birds. They were voices of omen, woven into the fragile silence of sleep. Dreams of falling carried a particular weight. Nearly everyone knew the sudden jolt of tumbling in slumber, and medieval people saw it as more than the body's twitch. They believed it was the soul slipping too far from the body, only to be yanked back suddenly. A mild, full dream was seen as a warning to be more prayerful, but repeated visions of plunging could leave a family deeply concerned. Priests sometimes advised fasting or special prayers to cleanse the dreamer of hidden sin. For the dreamer, waking breathless with the sensation of falling was to feel not only the fragility of the body, but the precarious tether of the soul itself. Thus stitched charms, midnight cries, and plunging dreams all show how richly the medieval world clothed the act of sleep with meaning. Each gesture, each sound, each vision carried weight, turning the night into a tapestry of symbols and protections. Bells were sometimes tied to cradles. Their soft jingles meant to guard babies through the night. Parents believed that the faint sound frightened away wandering spirits, who disliked iron and sudden noises. The gentle ring was also a reassurance to mothers dozing nearby, proof that the child stirred or turned. In some households, the cradle itself was rocked until the bell sang faintly, a lullaby of metal as much as voice. To sleep with that delicate chiming was to feel the child enclosed not only in blankets, but in invisible circles of sound and safety. Pointing at sleepers was strictly avoided. Many believed that a finger aimed at one dreaming could pin their soul, trapping it outside the body or summoning bad luck. Children were taught never to mock or poke at those asleep, for fear that the dreamer would wake startled and weakened. Even doctors and priests approached sleepers with care, touching the arm or shoulder gently rather than pointing. The gesture of a finger was seen as too sharp, too commanding, to direct toward someone resting at the fragile threshold between worlds. Sleep was a state to be respected, never disturbed by careless signs. Dreams of water were thought to carry prophetic meaning. To dream of calm rivers or clear wells promised peace and good fortune, while turbulent seas or floods signalled trouble ahead. Lovers often hoped for dreams of flowing streams, which were said to predict happy unions. Farmers cherished visions of rain, taking them as divine assurance of fertile fields. But drowning dreams filled people with dread, believed to foretell sickness or death. When such dreams were shared in the morning, families took them seriously, offering prayers or alms to balance the omen. Water in dreams was not simply imagination. It was the language of the future, whispered through sleep. Thus, bells by cradles, respectful gestures, and water visions show again how medieval people treated night as sacred ground. Every detail mattered, every sound and dream carried meaning, turning rest into a careful passage watched by faith and fear alike. Mirrors were often covered before sleep, a practice rooted in deep superstition. People feared that the soul, wandering during dreams, might mistake its reflection for a trap and become caught in the glass. Some said uncovered mirrors invited spirits to step through, using the surface as a doorway into the chamber. To prevent such dangers, cloths were draped over reflective surfaces at dusk, turning their silent faces away from the night. A covered mirror gave peace of mind, reassuring the sleeper that their dreams would not be disturbed by shadows peering back. Night sweats were common in an age of heavy blankets and drafty rooms, and remedies ranged from the practical to the peculiar. Physicians recommended sleeping in lighter linens or drinking herbal infusions of sage and willow bark before bed. Others prescribed charms, wearing a sprig of rosemary tied to the chest, or laying cool stones beneath the pillow to draw away the heat. Some even believed sweating during sleep signaled the body purging illness, a sign of hidden healing. Whether by herbs, stones, or simple endurance, people sought meaning in the body's mysterious flushes of warmth. Trees, too, shaped the imagination of medieval sleep. Villagers avoided bedding down beneath elder trees, for they were thought to harbour restless spirits or witches in disguise. Ash trees, by contrast, were believed to offer protection, their branches shielding sleepers from harm. Travellers often looked carefully at where they rested outdoors, choosing groves with care and muttering small prayers if no safe tree was near. To sleep under the wrong bough was to risk nightmares, or worse, waking touched by something unseen. Thus even the natural canopy above became a force that shaped rest, guiding choices in where and how one lay down. Covered mirrors, cooling remedies, and watchful trees remind us once again that sleep was never simple in the medieval world. Every object, every habit, every shadow carried weight, turning the act of rest into a careful ritual of survival. Sleeping near graves was generally avoided, for churchyards carried both reverence and dread. Some believed the souls of the newly buried wandered at night, searching for peace, and could disturb sleepers resting too close. Yet there were exceptions. Pilgrims sometimes chose to lie near the tomb of a saint, trusting that the holiness of the place would guard them from harm. For others, a graveyard was a place of silence and stillness, both comforting and unnerving. To close one's eyes among the dead was to feel the veil between worlds thin, sleep pressing against eternity itself. Weapons beside the bed were common in both towns and countryside. A sword, dagger, or even a sturdy staff might be kept within arm's reach, a safeguard against thieves, wild animals, or worse. For many men, the weight of a weapon close at hand gave a sense of control, even while dreaming. Some believed that iron itself held protective power, warding off spirits just as it repelled fleshly enemies. In poorer homes, even a simple knife laid on the floor was thought to guard the household through the night. Sleep, fragile and unguarded, was thus ringed with cold steel, as though rest required the shadow of readiness. Lullabies were not always mere songs of comfort. They often doubled as quiet prayers. Mothers whispered verses that called on saints to watch over their children, or wove blessings into simple rhymes so familiar they became second nature. These tunes carried both melody and faith, a soft layering of words that promised the child was protected from harm. Even fathers and older siblings joined in, humming familiar refrains that mingled music with devotion. To fall asleep under such songs was to be cradled by both family and faith, the tune itself a gentle wall against the night. Thus graves, blades, and lullabies all played their part in shaping the medieval night. Sleep was never left to chance. It was ringed with defences, spoken over with prayers, and carried on traditions as old as memory. Some families left windows slightly open at night, not only for air but for spirits to pass. It was believed that if a soul, human or otherwise, wandered near the home, a small opening allowed it to move on without disturbing the sleepers inside. A tightly shut house they feared might trap restless spirits, leading to nightmares or illness. The draught of cool air was a small price to pay for peace. Villagers spoke of feeling lighter dreams when windows were cracked open, as if allowing the night itself to breathe through the chamber. Animals appearing in dreams carried special meaning. To dream of a horse often signalled travel or a long journey ahead, while cows promised plenty and pigs warned of gluttony. Birds in dreams were treated with particular care. A dove meant peace, an owl meant sorrow, a crow meant change. Dogs, as in life, were seen as guardians, appearing in dreams to warn or protect. Families shared these animal dreams over breakfast, interpreting them with the same seriousness as weather signs. Sleep became not only rest, but a theatre of creatures, each with its own message for the waking day. Even the humble straw in mattresses was given attention. Before stuffing sacks or pallets, some families sprinkled the straw with holy water or blessed herbs, asking for safety in the sleep it would cradle. Farmers sometimes saved the first cut of harvest straw for bedding, believing it carried special luck. Others avoided using straw from certain fields, fearing it might have been touched by misfortune or cursed by witches. To lie down upon blessed straw was to rest in more than comfort. It was to trust the very ground beneath one's body to guard dreams and life alike. Open windows, dream animals, and consecrated straw, each shows again how medieval people approached sleep with awe and care. The night was alive with presences, and rest itself was an act surrounded by unseen company. And so, when we look back at the strange, tender, and sometimes fearful sleep habits of medieval people, we see a world where rest was never simple. Sleep was surrounded by charms, prayers, animals, and omens, each night a careful crossing from waking into mystery. Every creak of timber, every flicker of fire, every dream carried meaning, shaping the fragile hours between dusk and dawn. In their rituals we find both strangeness and comfort, a reminder that across centuries people have always sought the same thing, to close their eyes in safety, and to wake with hope in the light of morning. So let your mind drift now, as theirs once did, through the hush of night and into gentle dreams. The worries of the day can be set aside, just as they set theirs aside with charms and prayers. You are safe, you are watched over, and morning will come in its own time. For now, simply rest.